So basically, I just wanted to kind of give a bit of an update on some of the recent progress with UKCA and just start off with a reminder about what is UKCA. So UKCA is the UK chemistry and aerosol model, which is the key component for chemistry, climate interactions and composition climate interactions in the UK ESM model, and as we've seen during this conference in lots of other Earth system models. But more than that, I feel UKCA is also this community of scientists working right at the forefront of trying to understand the interactions between atmospheric composition and climate. And when I think about that community, you know, I think it now really does span the globe. So this workshop, although we're not kind of calling it the UKCA workshop, to many intents and purposes, I also feel that this composition climate interactions community is really part of the UKCA community. So how is UKCA being used? And again, many of you will know this, but just as a recap, so UKCA kind of provides that core capability for applications such as air quality modeling, where versions of UKCA are kind of used in the AQUM model and within the Clean Air project. And we're going to hear a bit about that later this morning. And then UKCA, as I said, is also used within the Earth system modeling frameworks. And so we've had talks about UKSM, AXIS, and to some extent, the New Zealand Earth system model as well over the last few weeks. And as well as looking at both those big broad scales at the Earth system and maybe those more regional problems of air quality, it's kind of used to understand global composition, climate interactions. Effectively all global atmosphere and global coupled configurations of the use UKCA in some form or another. You know, and it's kind of used widely within NCAS and Hadley Centre, and we could put more and more stakeholders of UKCA if we wanted to. Now, UKCA has a core team of people that try and work on the development of the model, and that core team is, you know, really supplemented by the people in this community who are working on their own research problems, trying to develop new capabilities in the model. But the core team has a vision, a 5-year strategy, and part of that vision and 5-year strategy is to improve bits of the infrastructure. And so what we're going to hear about later is the standalone UKCA and work to develop a standalone UKCA and what that means for you, what are the benefits, as well as develop new configurations. And we'll hear a bit about some of the very high resolution configurations which are being developed, and develop processes as well. And we've seen talks throughout the week about the development of new chemistry schemes. So Scott Archer-Nichols talked about the work on the CRI chemistry scheme. And again, later this morning, we'll hear about improvements to some of the processes. But a key part of really what this core team is trying to do is also rigorously evaluate and constrain using observations some of these processes. And that doesn't mean that that's just the job of the core team as well. And I kind of, I'll bring up some aspects of model evaluation where I think, you know, people in the community have really helped as well. And then finally, you know, one of the core objectives is to exploit the model through Earth system models, through activities like large collaborative research programs, and also through CMIP6 and other big model intercomparisons. And I just, you know, kind of reiterate that this sort of 5-year plan also coincides with large changes in not only the unified model within which UKCA currently sits. So during the next 5 years, the is effectively going to be to some extent retired. But also that coincides with changes in high performance computers and the architectures for those. So that basically the next 5 years is quite quite an important period of change. And so we can kind of think about these continual developments to the model, continual releases, and continual improvements. And largely as well, some of these improvements will be informed by the science that you're doing as well. So I think it's really worth it, this type of conference, to kind of highlight the key role that people have been playing in making UKCA a success. And I think first off, I think I'd like to really acknowledge all of the hard work that Fiona O'Connor has done in leading the UKCA contribution to AQUM MIP with UK ESM1. And for those of you that haven't heard of AQUM MIP, well, you know, it's this really important sub-project of CMIP6, which is really looking at, you know, our bread and butter, so the impacts of chemistry and aerosols within the Earth system. UKSM1, I think, has produced the largest number of simulations to AQUM MIP, and you know, the more simulations you have, the better an idea of attribution you can do, and a better understanding of the Earth system we can produce. On top of all of the hard work by Fiona, just huge congratulations to all of those involved in analysing CMIP6 model results, in converting the data. I know that that's been a huge task, but also in writing these papers. So we don't have time to go through every paper today, but there have been some really amazing papers that have come out of this. So huge congratulations to all of those working on CMIP6. You know, and it actually, you don't have to do more than a quick web search to kind of see the number of papers that have come out in the last year using UKCA, and it's really nice to see. Certainly, the EGU journals are getting good business out of us, and some really awesome science as well is coming out. I wanted to just focus on a couple of key results from the recent evaluation paper that I led on UKCA strat-trop chemistry, because I think there's some important aspects of the representation of some processes in the model that is worth highlighting to this community. And I've kind of started off with what I think are some of the less good aspects that come out through model evaluation. And so these plots that came from Steve Turnock. So he's done an excellent job of analysing surface ozone in UK ESM, and effectively what we see, and what Steve has also shown with other CMIP6 models, so UKCA is not on its own, but that we end up with quite a low bias in winter compared to observations, so of around about 10 parts per billion to even as low as 16 parts per billion bias, but then a high summertime bias in these regions as well. And like I said, this isn't completely unique to UKCA, but I think it's something to bear in mind. So when you look at the annual mean bias, actually the model does a really good job. But if you're interested in kind of looking at these processes like air pollution, I think, you know, you might just want to kind of know that this model and other models as well in the CMIP6 era have these types of biases. And indeed, you may be really interested in trying to understand how to attribute those biases and reduce them as well. You know, that might be a research question that you're pretty interested in. Connected with the ozone bias at the surface actually could be the process of deposition, and these plots here come courtesy of Gerd Folberth. And what Gerd did was compile a big database of ozone deposition fluxes, and those are shown here as these circles with some error bars to show the uncertainty in those fluxes. As a function of time throughout the year, January to December, and then in red, the UKCA, UK ESM data at these different locations. So these are all around the world. And what you can see is that whilst the model generally performs reasonably well. There are places where the deposition isn't so good. Now, this is a deposition flux, so some of this might be down to the ozone values themselves. But if we look at a place like Blodgett Forest, which is in the US, we know in the summertime we have a high ozone bias over that region. We've just seen that. Yet we have a low ozone flux over that region. And it's quite low. It's like about a factor of 3 too low. So, you know, potentially part of the high ozone bias in bits of the US might be attributed to the deposition schema. And I know Ashok Luhar has worked extensively on some of the aspects of ozone deposition. And I know that Catherine Hardacre has kind of shown some of the recent improvements that deposition of or changes to SO2 deposition have made in UKCA. So that's been really good to see. But there's potential here for a bit of a focus on ozone as well. I'll skip through, and then Paul Griffiths has produced this plot, which I think really nicely shows that when we compare the UKCA ozone, OH radicals in black to the ACCMIP multi-model mean and the Spivakowski climatology, so these are kind of canonical numbers for what OH distribution should be. Generally speaking, we do well, apart from these two regions, which I've highlighted in red. And again, I don't think in this paper we've managed to attribute the reasons for this, but these are really regions where the bias is really high compared to the variability in the model and compared to other estimates of what OH should be. And this has impacts on things like methane lifetime and so the sort of the methane radiative forcing. So I think that's quite important. And then Maria Russo has kind of talked about this in her talk as well, but effectively we know that the tropospheric ozone column is high biased, particularly over the tropics. And we see that that bias is around on the order of 10 to 15 Dobson units. And we look at the total column and compare that to the NIWA Bodecker data set. We see that the total stratospheric or the total column ozone is biased high by about 30 to 40 Dobson units in the tropics. So we've got this tropospheric tropical high bias, and then we've also got some high bias in the stratosphere somewhere. And James Keeble is going to talk a lot more about that later. Similarly, the tropospheric column NO2 in UKCA seems to have some significant biases, and this is data courtesy of Maria Russo again and Richard Pope at Leeds and NCEO, and they compared to OMI satellite data here in black, and basically I think showed two interesting things. One is this persistent low bias in NO2 in the southern hemisphere, and actually if you go back to the ozone, you see that the ozone column is low biased in the southern hemisphere, so in the troposphere. So I wonder whether there's something connected there. But then a really significantly high bias in wintertime over East Asia. And we kind of are keen to understand the reasons for that. And then finally from this paper, I think one of the other biases which came out is this high water vapor bias in the lower stratosphere, but a low water vapor bias in the upper stratosphere. These plots are from Olaf Morgenstern, and I think as well James Keeble will talk a little bit about this later. So you could argue those are some of the bad points. What about some of the more good points? So there's been a really amazing development of having interactive methane emissions, so flux-based lower boundary conditions, to effectively have fully interactive methane in UKESM1, UKCA. And this work has been led by Gerd Folberth at the Met Office. And one of the really outstanding features of this capability is the ability to recreate the methane hiatus during the 2000s. So I think watch this space for some really interesting results that come out of that work. We've already seen Scott Archer-Nichols talk on the CRI mechanism, But I think there are two take-homes here for me. One is that actually the chemistry isn't as slow as you might have feared. Basically, in doubling the chemistry, it doesn't take double the amount of time. And by having a more complex chemistry scheme, we've got the benefit of having detailed process representation. So just also point you to James Weber's talk on the development of highly oxygenated molecule chemistry, HOM chemistry associated with the CRI. And finally, a couple of points on communication. Since the last year, we've got a new theme for the UKCA website, but it's the same content effectively. And we really want to make more use of this website as a communication platform. So there's a survey, there's a link to the survey on the website, there's a link to the survey in the Google Doc, but also feel free to just contact us, me, anybody with ideas about how you'd like to see the layout of the website improved. Similarly, thanks to Paul Griffiths and Gerd Folberth, we developed a Slack channel for UKCA. You can join it here, ukca.slack.com, if Slack is your thing. You know, for those of you that haven't used Slack, it's a nice environment for messaging. You know, it kind of makes email a bit redundant, allows you to share things, allows you to link to Google Docs. It's really a powerful tool, and we kind of really encourage people to think about using Slack as a way of communicating in the future. And then lastly, on the science side, I think there's been some really nice bits of work led by some of the PhD students and postdocs here in Cambridge and also in Leeds as well, looking at the impacts of the current COVID-19 pandemic on atmospheric composition, and also trying to understand the impacts on climate effectively. So, and I think this is an area that we'll see a lot more attention being directed towards it. We've got this unique opportunity to try and understand how the Earth system responds to big emission changes. And so far, what we see is that we're able to capture things like changes in NO2 compared to satellite data, and the changes that they have on ozone. And then what we see in the runs here, which James Weber has led and led to a paper which is currently in review, is that there are minimal climate impacts from these changes. And then finally, just a big thank you to all of you for all of the work that you put into UKCA. There's this core team of us who are here to help users develop science and learn how to use the model. But really, UKCA is about much more than this core team. It's about you and what you're doing. And we're just really grateful for all the hard work that you put in. So I'm chairing my own talk, which is always dangerous, but I'm going to stop sharing, and I will take any quick questions from the Google Doc. And so the first point was a clarification. So the survey is a user survey. It's not just about the website. It's aimed to give feedback and gather feedback about user experience and identify priorities for future work. So yeah, so please do fill in that survey, as that's what's really going to help guide us in the core team know how to prioritize bits of future work.